Jon Jones. And I only throw that name out because it's a name that you spoke about and that the viewers are going to recognize. But Jon is in the process of what I call an experiment, only because I've never seen it. Maybe it's been done, but I haven't seen a guy who post 30 decides he's going to put on 40 pounds of muscle. And that number was a little bit arbitrary to me, the listener, but Jon picked it and I just followed him. He documented this on Instagram. He said, I'm getting up to 240, going from 205 pounds to 240 pounds. He walked around about 220. Maybe even closer to 218. So he's got to put on some real size. He wants to do it the right way. And he's doing it, kind of post what people would consider your prime. Coach, it worked. Jon Jones, according to Instagram, is at 240. And I must tell you, he looks good. And to put on muscle, the general rule, correct me if I'm wrong, you got to put on fat too. You got to put on everything and then you can take the fat off. That's the general belief. But the highest Jon ever got was to about 242. He's taken some of that off. He's still at 240, so we're really splitting hairs here. And he looks the part. He looks like a solid guy who's passing USADA. Is this uncommon? Have you heard of that? I got to call it an experiment. I don't know stories like this. Do you?
It's absolutely possible and makes sense. And what you see more commonly is people who switch sports from more like doing a cardiovascular endurance type of sport and switching into something that's more like bodybuilding or powerlifting. So what we see in the UFC and fighting is regardless of what people think, there is so much cardiovascular requirements on those athletes. They could probably go and outrun most athletes. They're in such good shape physically. And so they're doing so much cardio, and it's not so much bench pressing and trying to put on a bunch of weight. You don't want a lot of muscle mass per se, because it'll tire you out more quickly. And so Jon Jones, I believe he would have been training less intensely in terms of his goal to build muscle, more so focusing on cardio. And so as he's gotten older, he's saying, no, now I want to add muscle. So to me, he would have newbie gains. And in that first few years of growth, it's a lot easier to put on muscle. And because he hasn't really focused on building muscle, those newbie gains, they don't go away. They're present. Even though he's been training his whole life, he hasn't surpassed his natural genetic limit. So until he gets there, he has the ability to get muscle. And what I like to say is with an elastic, the further you go and stretch the elastic, the harder it is to gain muscle. So when he was a lighter guy, 218, it wasn't stretched too far because his body naturally could probably go up in weight. As he's getting to 240, if he wanted to get to 260, he'd probably need to take steroids at that point. But at 240, not really. And to answer the question, does he not need to gain a lot of fat to gain the muscle? The answer actually is no. What he's doing, I kind of call it main gaining, being able to build muscle while remaining at a set body fat percentage. Once you're at a healthy body fat percentage, which is different for everyone, some people it's 10%, some it's 15, some it's 20. If he's at that healthy body fat percentage, he can go up in muscle without adding any weight of any body fat whatsoever. So he can just slowly put on that muscle, given the fact that he's training, he's changing the way he's training, maybe focusing more on cardio and now focusing on, I just want to get jacked. Just like a marathon runner, if they said, I want to now be a bodybuilder, they're going to add a ton of muscle, whether or not they've been training their whole life. And Phil Heath, Mr. Olympia 8 times, he was a high-level basketball player. Imagine the cardio. He switched from basketball and said, I'm going to really focus on pumping the weights. He would have been lifting some, but the change in physique, he went to Mr. Olympia. So he had those newbie gains in his system the same way that Jon Jones would have. And so once he actually focused on that muscle building, he was able to do so. So I don't think he would have to actually take banned performance enhancing substances to go from, say, close to 220 to 240, even though he's in his 30s and what would be considered past his prime for building muscle.
Okay, so I hear everything you're saying, and we don't have to get, he did it. I mean, he passed the test and he put the size on. But I do want to go back to what you said, because it sounds as though he had to sacrifice one for the other. He had to sacrifice cardio. Ultimately, it's calories in versus calories out. So he sacrificed cardio to put on the size. Now, if you were just to make a prediction, at 34 years old, taking on the absolute best of the best in the new weight class, can he have the conditioning to go 25 minutes hard if he needed to?
I don't think he'll have the same conditioning as he had. So if we're comparing Jon Jones at 205 versus Jon Jones as a heavyweight, he's not going to have the same conditioning as he had. However, he's fighting against guys who also don't have the conditioning he had at 205. So in moving up a weight class, I don't think he's going to be fighting guys that have the same conditioning as he had. So what he makes up for with added size and strength, he's losing some cardiovascular, but it's probably going to balance out.